Welcome to Nazi Crime Series. Today we will talk about Kristallnacht, or the Night of Broken Glass, marks a dark and pivotal moment in history. Occurring on November 9th and 10th, 1938, this violent pogrom against Jews throughout Nazi Germany and Austria signaled the transition from discriminatory policies to outright violence and terror. Synagogues were set ablaze, Jewish-owned shops were shattered, homes were destroyed, and approximately 30,000 Jewish men were arrested and sent to concentration camps. This orchestrated wave of terror not only marked the escalation of Nazi anti-Semitism but also laid the groundwork for the Holocaust. In this episode, we will explore the events leading up to Kristallnacht, the horrific night itself, and the devastating consequences that followed. By the time Kristallnacht occurred, anti-Semitism was already deeply entrenched in Nazi Germany. The Nuremberg laws of 1935 had stripped Jews of their citizenship and prohibited them from marrying or having sexual relations with persons of German or related blood. Jewish businesses were boycotted, and Jews were increasingly marginalized from society. This systematic persecution reached a critical point in 1938 with the annexation of Austria, Anschluss, in March, which brought more Jews under Nazi control and led to increased violence and discrimination. The immediate precursor to Kristallnacht was the expulsion of around 17,000 Polish Jews from Germany in October 1938. These Jews, many of whom had lived in Germany for decades, were forced to leave their homes and were herded to the Polish border. However, Poland refused to accept them, leaving thousands stranded in no man's land under appalling conditions. Among those expelled were the parents of Herschel Greenspan, a 17-year-old Polish Jew living in Paris. Enraged by the treatment of his parents, Greenspan assassinated Ernst vom Rath, a German diplomat, on November 7, 1938. The Nazis seized upon this event as a pretext to launch a massive, coordinated attack on Jews throughout the Reich. On the night of November 9, 1938, Nazi officials and paramilitary forces, including the SA, Sturmabteilung, and SS, Schutzstaffel, unleashed a wave of violence against Jews across Germany, Austria, and the Sudetenland. The violence was carefully orchestrated, yet presented to the public as a spontaneous outburst of righteous anger in response to the assassination of Ernst vom Rath. Synagogues were set on fire, and Jewish homes, schools, and businesses were ransacked and destroyed. The shattered glass from the windows of Jewish-owned stores, which littered the streets, gave the night its name, Kristallnacht, or the Night of Broken Glass. In addition to the widespread destruction of property, nearly 100 Jews were killed during the pogrom. The violence was particularly brutal, with many Jews beaten and humiliated in public. Jewish cemeteries were desecrated, Torah scrolls and other religious artifacts were vandalized, and the Nazis made no effort to hide their intentions to annihilate Jewish culture and identity. The Nazis also targeted Jewish men for arrest, with around 30,000 being rounded up and sent to concentration camps, primarily Dachau, Buchenwald, and Sachsenhausen. These men were subjected to brutal treatment, forced labor, and horrific living conditions. The arrests served as a clear warning to the Jewish community. The Nazis were willing and prepared to escalate their persecution to unprecedented levels of violence. The morning after Kristallnacht, the devastation was evident. Streets were littered with broken glass, burnt synagogues smoldered, and Jewish businesses were in ruins. The world was shocked by the scale and brutality of the pogrom, but the response was largely one of condemnation without significant action. In Germany, the Nazi regime immediately blamed the Jews for the destruction, claiming they were responsible for provoking the violence. In a twisted display of cruelty, the Nazi government imposed a collective fine of 1 billion Reichsmarks on the Jewish community to cover the damages. Furthermore, Jews were forced to clean up the destruction at their own expense, and insurance claims for the damage were confiscated by the state. This period marked a turning point in Nazi policy toward the Jews. Kristallnacht was not an isolated incident, but part of a broader strategy to remove Jews from German society entirely. Following the pogrom, the Nazi regime intensified its efforts to force Jews out of the economy, stripping them of their remaining assets and banning them from public places such as schools, theaters, and parks. Jewish children were expelled from German schools, and the Jewish community became even more isolated from the rest of society. While the world expressed outrage at the events of Kristallnacht, the international response was largely symbolic. Condemnations came from many Western nations, and in some countries, such as the United States and United Kingdom, there were efforts to offer refuge to Jewish children through programs like the Kindertransport. However, these measures were limited in scope, and the majority of nations maintained restrictive immigration policies that prevented most Jewish refugees from finding safe harbor. The muted international response emboldened the Nazis, who interpreted the lack of decisive action as a tacit acceptance of their policies. The failure of the international community to intervene would have devastating consequences, as it encouraged the Nazi regime to continue its campaign of extermination that would culminate in the Holocaust. Kristallnacht was a turning point in Nazi Germany's persecution of Jews. It marked the transition from social and economic disenfranchisement to physical violence and mass incarceration. For many Jews, the pogrom was a wake-up call, shattering any remaining illusions that they could survive under Nazi rule. The events of Kristallnacht made it clear that the Nazis were committed to the complete destruction of Jewish life in Germany and beyond. The pogrom also served as a testing ground for the Nazis' future genocidal policies. The coordination between Nazi officials, local authorities, and the paramilitary forces during Kristallnacht laid the groundwork for the mass deportations and exterminations that would follow. The brutality of Kristallnacht foreshadowed the horrors of the Holocaust, where millions of Jews would be systematically murdered in concentration and extermination camps across Europe. Today, Kristallnacht is remembered as a symbol of the dangers of unchecked hatred and intolerance. It serves as a reminder of the consequences of indifference in the face of evil. The shattered glass of Kristallnacht represents not only the physical destruction of Jewish life, but also the breaking of a civilization that allowed such atrocities to occur. In Germany and around the world, Kristallnacht is commemorated each year to honor the victims and to reflect on the lessons of history. Memorials, museums, and educational programs dedicated to the Holocaust ensure that the horrors of Kristallnacht and the Holocaust are never forgotten. As we remember Kristallnacht, we are reminded of the importance of standing against hatred, bigotry, and all forms of discrimination, wherever they may arise. Kristallnacht was a night that changed the course of history. It was a violent eruption of anti-Semitism that laid bare the Nazi regime's genocidal intentions. The events of November 9th and 10th, 1938, marked the beginning of a descent into the abyss, a path that would lead to the systematic murder of 6 million Jews during the Holocaust. As we look back on Kristallnacht, we must remember the victims and survivors, and we must remain vigilant in our commitment to preventing such atrocities from ever happening again. If you liked this video, please subscribe to this channel and like this video. Thank you.